Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch, and today we will be talking about wind magic. This is once again a YouTube member and patron pick, so in case you want to also have a say in what I post on here, not only the topics for my more educational videos, but also more relaxed kind of content like Q&As or vlogs. If you want to have a say in that, then definitely make sure to sign up on my YouTube membership or my Patreon. It doesn't matter which platform you choose, both get the same kind of stuff. I just wanted to make it easier for anyone who doesn't want to sign up on a separate platform. In case that is the case for you, YouTube membership is also an option. But with that being said, let us talk about wind magic. Alright, let us start out with the obvious. Probably the first thing everyone will think of if they think of wind in the context of witchcraft or any magical practice is probably the air element. That's kind of the go-to because of course it is air that's moving, so of course the wind is associated with the air element, so in case you want to use the air element in any kind of spell, then of course wind would be like your go-to. So that is of course an obvious one. But there's much more to wind than just it being a representation of the air element. So it's not like the only thing you can do with wind is just do some kind of air-related spell while it's windy, you know. Of course you can do that, but it's not the only thing you can do. So that is what we will be getting in today. And I'm actually pretty excited about this video topic because I feel like wind magic is very underestimated and not used a lot. Storms, more so because a lot of people like to collect storm water, for example, but also the raw energy of a storm, I kind of feel like it's also not used a lot. We will not be talking about like thunderstorms or anything like that because that is an entirely separate topic. I will only be focusing on wind itself today because that already is quite a lot to talk about. And why am I so excited about it? Not only because I think it's underestimated, but also because we just have a lot of wind here. Where I live, just locally, the two elements that are most prevalent around here are air, because it's usually always windy, so windy that a lot of people don't even bother using an umbrella because it will just flip and fly away. Wind, very prevalent here, so the air element is very prevalent here, and also water because one, it's just constantly raining around here, it's constantly moist, but we also have a lot of lakes and rivers and two seas, so air and water are the most prevalent here. But I think that air and water are also the elements that are used the least in most magical practices. Like if you look on social media, most people will use either the earth and use like various plants, work maybe with plant spirits and things like that, or local spirits that are like in forests and stuff, or they will use a lot of candles or crystals, also earth related. But I kind of feel like water and especially air are not used a lot in their like natural form, in their physical form. And I don't really see people using the wind, which is kind of sad. I partly understand it though, because of course the wind will not get into your house or your apartment. So if you are a person who cannot practice outside, using the wind will be a little bit more difficult, but we will see later on that it's still very possible. It's just a little bit more tricky. Still, there are a lot of easy things that you can do with the wind that don't really require elaborate spell work outside, because that's also not something that I can do because I live in a big city. But let us get into that. Wind in magic. And by the way, we will not only talk about how you can incorporate them into spells, but also various different other things, because there is a lot to it. So let's get into it. First of all, when I think about using the wind in magic, I kind of see it as two different things that we can do with it. We can either use it as a separate agent in a spell, so really like doing spell work in the wind and working with the wind itself for a spell specifically and during spell work. But we could also use it as just like a little support, maybe a correspondence. I would see it more as a support than a correspondence. So there are these two separate parts, and I will talk about them separately because I kind of feel like that makes it easier. The wind also has definitely more associations than just the air element. We will talk about that later on. There are different kinds of associations that different kinds of winds have that you can work with. And that will also sometimes be very dependent on where you live. Depending on where you live, the wind will come from different directions, will have different properties, and will bring different things. So depending on where you live, this will probably look different. And I think that is a very fun part of it, because not only do you have to connect with like the plants around you or anything, but you actually have to look into the weather and the climate where you live, like where's the wind coming from usually, which kind of strengths, etc. Because that will influence what you can do with the wind around you. I think that's pretty fun. And lastly, of course, the wind is also usually seen as having like its own spirit. Sometimes it's even personified as deities. So if you look at, for example, ancient Greece, there were different kinds of deities that were, for example, associated with the different winds coming from different cardinal directions. I'm not really proficient when it comes to ancient Greece or Greek mythology, so I will not go too deep into it, but I still wanted to mention it because in case you work with the Greek pantheon, or if you are a Hellenist or something like that, then maybe you want to look into that, who knows. But not only is the wind usually seen as having either its own spirits or even being personified as specific deities, what we also see a lot in folklore, at least in Scandinavia, I'm not necessarily sure about other areas, we also see things like spirits coming through the wind or riding on the wind. And we can also see that, for example, with the wild hunt, which is usually seen as riding through the air, it's also a lot of the times seen as riding in storms or strong winds. There's also stories about witches riding through the wind, through the air. And elves sometimes also seen as flying through the air in the wind, and other usually more maleficent spirits. So what you see quite a lot are stories about any of these beings, witches, elves, whatever, coming with the wind while it's usually a north wind, and then putting some kind of malicious energy onto you, hexing you, cursing you, whatever, putting something on you. Could also be an illness, something like that. So that is something that we see. I am not really an expert when it comes to spirits that come with the wind or just wind spirits in general. I have connected with wind spirits sometimes a little bit, but I'm far from an expert, so I will not go deeper into that. If you're interested in that, then I would suggest you study folklore, or maybe look for someone who works with wind spirits a lot and ask them about it. I'm not an expert and I don't want to make stuff up, so I just wanted to mention that it's a thing, but I don't really know a lot more about that. So that's not something that I will go deeper into today. So now let us talk about types of winds and their associations, because there are quite a few. It's not like the wind is only associated with the air element and you can't do anything more than that with it. The first thing that probably a lot of you will already know are the associations of the different winds coming from different cardinal directions and them being associated with the different elements. So I know there are a lot of different associations with elements and cardinal directions. I usually see it as east being air, south being fire, west being water, and then north being earth. That also kind of aligns with what the winds bring where I live. So for example, for me, where I live, we usually have west wind, which, because it comes from the ocean, brings a lot of rain with it. So west winds are usually very rainy winds. So water being in the west for me makes sense. Whereas east winds are pretty rare around here. So it being the air element kind of makes sense because it's something new, something fresh. The south, like south wind, usually brings warm air. So being fire in the south makes sense. As does north wind, because north wind here, it comes from Scandinavia, so it usually brings more colder air. So these, for me, these associations, they also make sense where I live locally. But I know there are magical practitioners out there who associate different directions with different elements. So of course, depending on which directions you associate with which elements, these will change. But these are the associations that I work with myself, and those have worked for me. These are associations that you can work with the wind. So depending on where the wind is coming from, you can do different things with it. If the wind comes from the south, for example, and you work with the same associations that I work with, you could use it to work with fiery things. If the wind comes from the east, you could work with air-related things. From the north, with earth-related things. So it's not just the air is the air element, but also depending on which direction it comes from, you can, if you want to, use it to work with different elemental associations. Then, of course, I already talked about ancient Greece. They had a lot of different associations with different kinds of winds. I just very quickly skipped over a Wikipedia page about it and saw that there are different kinds of winds. Like some philosophers said there are 4 different winds, there are 6 different winds, even 8 or more. And some of them were so important that they even got their own deities as personifications of these winds. So if you work in these kinds of traditions, then of course you can look deeper into that and then work with those associations. For me personally, that doesn't really make sense because I don't really work with Greek stuff and I don't live anywhere near Greece. So for me this wouldn't make sense, but if you do, look into it. But of course Greece or ancient Greece is not the only area that has their own associations with different kinds of winds. Depending on where you live, there will probably be different associations with different winds. And those will most usually be like farmers' rules, you know, because of course the winds are very important for farmers because they will bring different things. If you want to get very bioregional with it, which I would recommend because it makes a lot of sense. If I live in Germany and I want to work with the Greek associations, for example, does that really make sense? Because the wind that I'm really working with is wind in Germany. So it would kind of make more sense to work with the local associations, in my opinion. So definitely look at farmers' rules. So for me, for example, this will be something like wind from the west usually brings rain. Wind from the south usually brings warmer and nicer weather, and wind from the north will make everything frosty. Things like that. So definitely look into that where you live locally. Farmers' rules rule. And while we're talking about different areas and different traditions, trolldom, so Scandinavian folk magic, actually also has its own associations with the different kinds of winds, and they also pretty much align with what I relate with. In this tradition, south wind is like the best wind. South wind is seen as bringing good and fortunate things, which also makes sense because it usually brings nice warm weather. Whereas wind from the north, we already know that in trolldom, anything that comes from the north is usually not nice, or like flowing to the north can get rid of nasty things because you're sending it away into the area where the nasty stuff comes from. The north is usually not cool, so also a north wind is usually said to bring these nasty entities and these nasty things with it. So working in the north wind, not the best idea. Also locally for me makes sense because north wind is usually very cold and not very pleasant. East wind is seen as also being cool, kind of like south wind, but not as great. And then lastly, the west wind is kind of meh. It's not bad, it's not good, it just doesn't really matter. If you want something neutral, work with the west wind. Then of course there's more to a wind than just its direction. Depending on where you live, there can be different types of winds. Not just like a normal wind, but things like tornadoes exist. They are wind. So if they exist where you live, then maybe look into that. Maybe they have some association where you live. Depending on where you live, it's possible that there are different kinds of winds than just like a normal gust of wind. So look into that. And of course, there's also not only different types of wind, but also different strengths. Wind does not equal wind. A light summer breeze is not the same as a hurricane, you know? Association-wise, if I do something in a light summer breeze, it will have an effect of, oh, this is nice, this is kind of refreshing, this is bringing new ideas, new things, this is kind of positive. Whereas if I would try to do a spell in a hurricane, that would be more so destructive and nice for painful workings, you know? There are different kinds of winds, different strengths, and depending on what is happening, depending on what kind of strength the wind has at the moment, it will also have different associations. I would not work with an extremely strong, very destructive kind of wind, including also a tornado, and try to work with it for cleansing or something. I mean, okay, if you want very chaotic, very destructive, like tower-associated cleansing, possible. Banishing would definitely work, but definitely would not be a very pleasant, calming kind of cleansing, whereas a nice summer breeze probably would be very nice. Something that you can always do is work with it intuitively. Look at the winds around you, the types of wind, the strength, the warmth, whatever, and then ask yourself, what does that tell me? Like, what do I personally, not any tradition, but what do I personally associate with this kind of wind? Is it pleasant? Is it dangerous? Is it destructive? Is it maybe refreshing? Ask yourself intuitively, what do I personally associate with? That's something you can always do, doesn't matter where you live. And for this kind of working, I would definitely advise you to keep track of the wind. Make sure that you can sit down and meditate in the wind, and then write down what it felt like. And then you will most probably be able to differentiate between the different kinds of winds, what they felt like, and through that you will know what you associate with them and what you can do with them. So now, assuming that you know your personal correspondences for the different kinds of wind, the first thing that you can do with wind is using it more as a support, an aid, or even like a correspondence. And the first thing that comes to mind for me, because I am very much of a green witch person, I really like to work with herbs, I like to harvest local herbs. But even if you want to do it in your own garden, this applies here. Or if you want to collect stones or seashells or whatever, this applies here. So depending on what wind is blowing while you're going out, harvesting herbs, collecting stones, seashells, whatever you want to get from the outside, depending on which wind blows while you're doing that, that can be used as a correspondence. So of course, depending on what kinds of associations you use, let's say you are using the 4 elements and a south wind is blowing, so a fire wind is blowing while you are harvesting herbs. This can give the herbs a little bit of a boost of fire energy. So for example, if you are planning on casting, let's say, a success spell, which I would probably do with fire, and you're going out, you want to harvest the herbs for the success spell, then it would make sense to do that while a south wind is blowing, because then not only are you harvesting fire-related or success-related herbs, but you can also use this south wind. So it's kind of an additional layer of intention and of the specific energy that you work with. Kind of like you would work with spell timing, you know, like you would, for success, maybe gather the herbs on a Sunday because that is the planet of the sun, or in the hour of the sun or something. It's kind of similar. You basically do the same thing, you just wait for the right wind to be blowing to gather these kinds of herbs. And then of course you can layer that too. You can also wait for a Sunday where a south wind is blowing and then gather the herbs in that kind of wind. Or another example, in case you want to work in the Scandinavian folk magic tradition, then you could, for example, gather baneful herbs, something that you would use for hexing or cursing or something like that, while a north wind is blowing, because the north wind brings the nasty stuff. So if I would want to gather nasty herbs that I want to use for a nasty working, then I would probably do that while the north wind is blowing. Of course, you can also do the same thing while casting the spell. So let's say, okay, probably the easiest one is the one that I already mentioned in the beginning. If you want to work with the air element, then do it in the wind while a strong wind is blowing. That will give the spell additional air energy. So that's of course a given. But you can get more nifty with it. And let's stay with the example. If I want to cast a baneful spell or do some kind of baneful working, doesn't have to be a spell even, then I would probably do that while a north wind is blowing, and do that in the wind while the north wind is blowing. Or if I want to cast a healing spell, then maybe I would do that while a wind from the south is blowing. So you can really really play with that. Of course, I would not recommend you try to cast a spell or harvest herbs while a tornado is blowing. Not the best idea. But now let's talk about more workings that you can do with the wind. So I personally like to use wind or work with wind to either bring something to me. So for example, if the south wind is blowing, I would assume that it's bringing nice things to me. Whereas while a north wind is blowing, for example, I would see it bringing more negative things to me. I would either use the wind to bring something to me, or I would use it to carry something away or to disperse something. You know, if you think of smoke, for example, and a wind blows, it blows the smoke away and disperses it. So that's something that you can work with. And while we're already working with air, wind, I like to incorporate my voice into it and my breath. So a lot of things that I would do with wind are pretty simple, like whispering something in the wind, chanting something in the wind, saying some kind of incantation into the wind. And depending on what I say, a lot of the times it's for like cleansing, so that the wind would take something away. For example, if I feel very scatterbrained, you know, and a south wind is blowing, so the wind is blowing from the south to the north, I would, for example, say some kind of incantation or chant so that the south wind is taking the stagnant energy from me, blowing it out of my body like smoke basically, and then carrying it to the north where all the nasty stuff is. Sounds weird, but it works really well. You will feel very refreshed afterwards. Depending on if it's warm or cold, of course, this will work different ways, but using it for like cleansing or banishing or something like that, for me personally, that works really well. But you can also use it to bring something to you, so you can ask the wind to bring you new ideas, for example, again working with the air element. But if it's a south wind, you could also ask it to bring something fire related or something, or healing or something like that. Of course, as always, it's very nice to, if you're working with a spirit like that, not just ask for something, but give something back. So I personally really like to give smoke offerings because it is the air element and it combines very well with air. You know, if you give incense as an offering, then the wind can very easily take the smoke and take it with it. Either use something small, you know, like, I don't know, flower petals or feathers or something that the wind can take with it, or like smoke. I personally really like that. And that way you have an offering to give back for the service that the wind spirit is providing for you, basically. Another very easy, accessible, but also very effective working, if you want to banish something, get rid of something, would be to burn it, to like anchor it, for example, in a piece of paper or wood or something, and then burn it and let the wind take the remains away, like the ashes, the smoke, everything. Of course, in my tradition, the way I work with wind, I would do it while a south wind is blowing, again, so that it takes away the nasty stuff to the north, where it belongs. So it can, while it burns, take away the smoke. So basically the spirit of what you're releasing right there. And when everything is sufficiently burned, you can even blow the ashes into the wind. If you're burning something like paper, this will be pretty effective and easy. But of course, you can also do it a different way. You can also use it to attract things. So then probably I would do it in a east or west wind, probably because I want it to blow not in the north, but somewhere else. So I'd probably do a east or west wind and burn something like a bind rune or something that says what I want. So for example, I want healing or something, and then I would burn it and let the wind take it with it so that it can take care of it and bring it back to me, or bring what I want back to me. Alrighty, I had to let my camera calm down a little bit. It was overheating. But now, let us continue. Okay, we had burning things for releasing and stuff, burning things and giving it to the wind to attract things. What we also can do, instead of burning stuff to attract things or to get rid of stuff and use the wind for that, we can hang things in the wind somewhere. And that could be, for example, wind chimes, any kinds of bells, anything like that, anything that makes a noise usually, and we can enchant that to do whatever we want. So of course, when it comes to sound, a lot of the times it's for cleansing or protection or things like that, you know, like hanging it outside of your house so that when the wind goes through the bells, then it will, I don't know, add a layer of protection, or it will cleanse the space or something like that. But you can also do it to attract joy or harmony or whatever you want. And these ones that are used for houses and stuff are usually there for longer term, but you can also do it very purposefully. You know, if you have a specific intention that you want, something very, very specific that you want in the moment, and you know that a wind will blow on Sunday that works with your intention, then you can also just use, I don't know, one bell and hang it in the tree just for the Sunday and enchant that bell so that the wind takes the sound with it to manifest your intention. And just do it this one day. So it doesn't have to be like this typical house, harmony, protection, whatever wind chime thing, but you can also do it more intentionally only one day and take it down afterwards. And then lastly, well, technically not the last thing you can do with wind, but the last thing that I want to mention in this video is any kind of flag or stave or something that you put up. For example, a nidstang, which my fellow heathens will probably know. But first, let us talk about flags. Flags are so insanely versatile and very, very accessible, because the only thing that you need is some kind of fabric, some kind of pole for the flag as a flag pole, and then like a marker or something so that you can put something on the fabric. And the fabric can be, of course, it's best if it's lightweight, but it can also be like an old bed sheet or something like that. You don't have to buy anything for it. And for the flagpole, you can also just use a stick from the forest. Totally fine. That way, if you use a stick from the forest, you can also incorporate other kinds of associations, use a branch from a specific tree that works for your intention, for example. But what I personally like about flags is that you can do so many things with it. You can basically make or just reuse. You don't necessarily have to make your own sigil or bind rune for it. You can also use a symbol that already exists that works for your spell intention. But let's say you make your own symbol. You would make a bind rune or a sigil and draw that on the flag, on the piece of cloth, and then charge it in whatever way you like. I don't know, with your breath, with your spit, with your blood, with smoke, whatever you like. Charge it, put your intention into it, and then put it up once a wind blows that works for your intention. That is so easy and so accessible. The only thing is you need any kind of space where you can put it up. So if you don't have a garden or anything like that, you would have to put it up somewhere out in nature or like a friend's garden or something, and then definitely take it down again. But it's so versatile, so accessible, so easy. And you can do a similar thing with just a pole. It doesn't necessarily have to be a flag. You can also just put up a pole. For example, you take a branch from a tree, you carve runes into it, you put it in the ground, and then let the wind basically take the intention that you put on the branch with runes and manifest it. This is also something that a nidstang works great with, because basically the curse that you put on the nidstang will be taken by the wind and then spread everywhere. That's like basically the idea, is that the wind takes your intention and your energy, and whatever you put into this pole or flag will take it with it and then spread it. So with a nidstang, for example, then of course you would place it so that the wind blows in the direction of the target, of course, because then the wind can take the curse and then carry it in the direction of the target. That's the basic idea. I personally really like it. Like, pole magic is even easier than flags, because you can also just put it up in a forest or something where nobody will see it. You don't have to put up a flag, which is very obvious. But if you just take a stick and you carve some runes into it, you charge it and put it up somewhere in nature, just put it in the ground, nobody will suspect a thing. So I kind of feel like this is very low-key magic that you can also very easily do if you're still, for example, in the broom closet and you don't want people to know what you're doing. And with that being said, that is everything that I wanted to go over today. Of course, that is not the end-all be-all. I bet there is so many more things that you can do with wind. If you have any further ideas, put them in the comments. I always like learning more, and I bet my viewers would also appreciate it. And with that being said, let's do a Patreon and YouTube member shout out. Thank you so much to Warren Carroll, Tanya, Jaina, Spider, Crow, Tegan, Margot, Catherine, Roberto, Crimson Plantners, Ellie, Petra, Lunafika, Jen, Maria, Katie, Amber, Saber, Pam, Mia, Victoria, Pat, Lindsay, The Other Saffron, Silent Selena, Richard, Jazz, Christiana, Sylvia, Katrina, V, Amanda, Derek, Kirsten, Andrew, Tisha, Sarah, Aziza, Shelby, Helena, SJ, Anne, Kate, Cade, Z, Kent, Brittany, Smoketa, Josh, Elinura, Knarren, Rixie Business, Ashley, Tim, Johnny, Phoenix, Jenny, Amy, Bethany, Timothy, Coffee, or the Honorary Gossip Squirrel, and last but not least, Bjorn. And now let us move over to the YouTube members. Thank you so much to Runa, Peony Rain, Jen, Pat, Lindsay, Betsy, Miller, and KT. Thank you so much. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell down below so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Make sure to check out my other socials and my shop for ethically and sustainably sourced witchy wares. And if you want to support me in a different way, then check out my Patreon or YouTube membership. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!